You carry trays and change sheets for a living. Don't act like you belong in the same room as my guests." That was how it started. Irina Caldwell said it in the corridor just off the main hall of Greymere, her voice pitched to carry. And it did carry, bouncing off the stone floors and the leaded windows that looked out over Lake Rosseau, landing on Dana Hollis the way a stone lands on still water, too precisely to be accidental. Dana was holding a silver coffee service at the time. She did not set it down badly. That was the small, private thing she allowed herself. She set it down on the sideboard with both hands level, and she looked at the woman who was going to marry Griffin Aldrich in 8 weeks, and she said nothing at all. What Irina Caldwell did not know, what none of them in that bright corridor knew yet, was that a courier van was already making its way up the long gravel drive from the county road, and that the envelope inside it carried a single document that was about to rearrange every name in this house. But that was still 4 days away. On this particular Saturday in late August, with the lake going silver gold through the tall windows and the caterers already staging the terrace for the weekend party, Dana Hollis simply squared her shoulders, picked up the coffee service she'd set down, and answered the only way she knew how. "Of course, Miss Caldwell," she said. "The canapes will be ready by 7. Irina's mouth curved. She was beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful. Polished, deliberate, built for admiration at the correct distance. Her blazer was a cream cashmere that cost more than Dana's monthly salary. She tilted her head and studied Dana the way you study a water stain on a ceiling. "You've been here too long," she said. "You walk around Greymere as though it belongs to you. It doesn't. It belongs to the Aldriches, and very soon it will belong to me." She let that land. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand every word," Dana said. Her voice stayed level and warm, almost pleasant. That seemed to bother Irina more than defiance would have. Behind them, one of the catering staff found something urgent to do in the kitchen. Andre, who had managed Greymere's gardens for 14 years and heard everything that happened in this house, kept his eyes on the chrysanthemums in the foyer vase, but his hands went very still. "Tonight," Irina went on, "you will not stand near the terrace while my guests are there. You will not speak unless spoken to. And you will change into something," a flick of her fingers toward Dana's plain charcoal dress. "That does not remind everyone that we keep help." She smiled. "Is that clear?" "Perfectly." Irina gathered her handbag from the sideboard. As she turned, she added almost lightly, "Honestly, I don't know why Muriel kept you for 4 years. Sentiment, I suppose. Old women collect strays." She paused, and the pause was not accidental. "But Muriel isn't here anymore, is she?" The words went through Dana like cold water. "No," she said, "she isn't." Irina's heels struck the stone floor as she walked out toward the terrace. The corridor let out its breath. Andre set down his shears. He said in the low voice of a man who had spent decades in service and knew exactly which words to spend, "She is not worth one grey hair of yours, Dana." "It's all right, Andre." Dana picked up the coffee service. The cups had not so much as clinked. "The chrysanthemums are perfect, by the way," she said. "Muriel would have put them in the east dining room too." Andre's face softened. "She would have put them everywhere. That woman never saw a windowsill she didn't want to fill." "No," Dana said, "she didn't." She carried the tray down the hall, past the old photographs, past the tall case clock that had ticked in this corridor since Greymere was built in 1903. She did not let anyone see that her hands had only now in the quiet begun to shake. To understand why Irina Caldwell's cruelty could not quite reach the center of Dana Hollis, you had to understand what Greymere had meant to her, and what one very specific old woman had made of a frightened 29-year-old who had arrived at the caretaker's entrance 4 summers ago with a duffel bag and a reference letter she had substantially written herself. Dana had come to Greymere for a property manager's position and nothing more. She had not expected the woman who ran the place, Muriel Aldrich, 83 years old, sharp as good cheddar and twice as pointed, to look her over once across the rim of her reading glasses and say, "You've been crying? Don't insult us both by pretending otherwise. Sit down and have some tea before you fall over." That was how it had started. Not with warmth exactly. With a cup of Earl Grey and a plate of butter tarts, and an old woman who asked questions and actually waited for the answers. Dana had no family to speak of. Her mother was somewhere in Alberta, remarried, distant. Her father's name was on a form in a government office. She had moved through hotel work and property management since she was 22, learning to be good at the thing everyone overlooked, making a place run smoothly, then disappearing from it. Muriel Aldrich had refused to let her disappear. "You have a good eye," Muriel had told her within the first month. "You notice things. You fixed the dry rot in the boathouse without anyone asking you to. You noticed the east chimney flashing was loose before the October ice got to it. Most people walk through their lives looking at their shoes. She'd tapped her cane once on the floorboards. You look at the room. That's rarer than people think." By the second year, Dana was not simply managing Greymere. She was running it. The accounts, the seasonal opening of the guest wing, the coordination of every tradesperson and supplier, who serviced a heritage property of 28 rooms sitting on 4 acres of Muskoka shoreline. Muriel's grandson paid the bills from Toronto and almost never came. It was Dana who sat with Muriel in the evenings on the screened porch, reading aloud when the old woman's eyes tired, learning the history of every piece of furniture, every summer storm, every story the Aldriches had ever collected in 100 years on this lake. "Griffin doesn't come," Muriel had said once, watching the loons on the water as the August sun went low. "He's not cold, whatever the business pages might have you think. He's just been taught that caring about things is a vulnerability a man in his position can't afford." She'd sighed. His father did that. The money finished the job. "Why doesn't he visit?" Dana had asked. "Because Greymere makes him remember being happy," Muriel said simply. "And happy is a debt for a boy like Griffin. He thinks if he lets himself have it, someone will come and collect." Dana had never forgotten that. She had filed it alongside everything else she noticed and kept to herself. And then, the previous October, Muriel had grown quiet and slow. One morning she had not come down for her tea. She had gone in her sleep at 86 in the room she'd spent every summer of her life in. Dana had sat with her a long time before she called anyone. There had been no drama in it, only the enormous particular silence of a house that has lost the person who was its heart. That had been 10 months ago. In those 10 months, Greymere had passed, everyone assumed, to Griffin Aldrich, the grandson who never came, and to the woman he had 3 months later, to the astonishment of the property pages, suddenly announced he would marry. The loons were calling when the floatplane came in low over the lake, and Dana heard the dock lines being tied from the window of the upper supply room, where she was counting linens. Not the tender runabout from the marina. The Aldrich floatplane. The one that only came from Toronto. She went to the window. Below, a man climbed out onto the dock in the afternoon brightness. Griffin Aldrich was 41. And she knew his face the way you know a face from photographs. The straight nose, the dark hair starting to go at the temples, the mouth that the business press called unreadable. What they never quite captured was that his eyes were older than the rest of him. He stood on the dock a moment, not moving, looking up at the cedar and stone face of Greymere the way a man looks at a word he used to know. Then he pressed 2 fingers briefly to the bridge of his nose, a small, exhausted gesture there and gone, and walked up toward the house. Dana smoothed her dress, tucked her hair back, and went down to do her job. She reached the front hall as he came through the door. The light was behind him. "Mr. Aldrich," she said, "we weren't expecting you until Sunday." He looked at her. There was a flicker. Not recognition, but the effort of it. "You're the property manager," he said. His voice was even and low, built for rooms where difficult things needed to be said quietly. "Hollis, Dana Hollis." "Yes." She inclined her head. "Can I bring you something? It's a long trip from the waterfront." "Nothing." He set a slim leather bag on the hall table. "I hear there's a party tonight." "Miss Caldwell arranged it. 40 guests. The caterers are already on the terrace." She kept her tone smooth, professional, a surface with nothing to catch on. "Everything is in hand. You needn't concern yourself." "I wasn't going to." He said it without unkindness, almost absently. He looked around the hall, at Andre's chrysanthemums banked against the staircase, at the light falling through the leaded panes, at the tall case clock. Something crossed his face. "Strange," he said, and seemed almost surprised to hear himself say it. "I keep expecting her to be in the sunroom with her tea going cold." Dana went very still. She knew exactly who he meant. She knew, too, that this was not the kind of sentence a man like Griffin Aldrich said aloud, and that he would regret it in approximately 4 seconds. She got there first. "She used to leave it on the windowsill until it was undrinkable," Dana said quietly. "Every morning, and then she'd complain that no one had refreshed it." For one unguarded instant, something opened in his face, a warmth, the beginning of something real. Then the terrace door swung and Irina swept in from the party setup, calling, "Darling, thank God. I need you to look at the seating before the caterers get fixed ideas." The warmth closed over in Griffin's face like water over a stone. "Irina," he said, and turned to her, and the boardroom voice settled back down like a shutter. Dana picked up his bag from the table. "I'll have this taken to your room, Mr. Aldrich," she said, already retreating toward the corridor. But at the doorway, she paused. She couldn't have said why, and glanced back. She found Griffin watching her go over Irina's shoulder, with an expression she could not read at all. The party that evening was by every visible measure a success. The long stone terrace glimmered with paper lanterns. Andre's chrysanthemums crowded every urn. The lake beyond lay flat and dark, and the music from the hired quartet hung in the warm August air as though it had nowhere better to be. 40 of the county's most photographed people drifted across the flagstones in fine wool and lightweight linen. Dana worked the edges of the evening exactly as she'd been told, invisible, keeping the trays moving, steering a retired senator away from the end of the dock, quietly managing a small grease flare in the catering tent before it became anything requiring a call to the Bracebridge volunteers. She was standing in the shadow of the rose trellis, out of the lantern light, when she heard the two women by the garden wall. Muriel's little project, apparently. One of them was saying, "A woman in navy, glass of rosé in hand. Irina can't stand her. Says she walks around Greymere like she built it herself." "Well, she doesn't own it," the other said, laughing. "Griffin does, or Irina will, soon enough. Poor thing will be out before the snow flies." Irina told half the room she's starting fresh after the wedding. New staff, new everything. She's already hired a firm in Toronto. They drifted toward the bar. Dana stood very still in the green dark, her tray level, and let the words move through her. Out before the snow flies. She had known it was coming since the morning Muriel's chair sat empty. She was not sentimental about the world. She had learned young what people in her position got to keep. And yet, the lake going dark past the terrace lights. The smell of cedar and warm stone and the end of the summer roses. 4 years of accounts and cold chimneys and long evenings on the screened porch, reading aloud while an old woman said sharp, fond things about everyone she had ever known. She had let herself think of Greymere as home. She could see now that she had never been permitted to. "You haven't stopped moving in 6 hours." She turned. Griffin stood a few feet away in the shadow of the trellis, outside the party, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. His collar was open. In the dimness he looked less like the photographs, less like the person the business press wrote about, and more like the boy Muriel had described, the one for whom happiness was a debt. "I'm working, Mr. Aldrich. You saved this party from itself twice that I watched, and no one has thanked you for either." He turned the glass in his fingers. "My grandmother wrote about you in her emails. The ones he paused, and the honesty cost him something visibly, the ones I mostly didn't answer." Dana said nothing. "She said you were the only person at Greymere who told her the truth," Griffin went on. "Everyone else told her what she wanted to hear, and you told her what was actually so. She said she'd never trusted anyone more." He looked at her directly. "I thought she was exaggerating. She exaggerated about everything. But I've been watching you all evening, and—" He stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for being here with her at the end." It was such a plain and unexpected thing that Dana felt her careful composure crack just slightly. "You're welcome," she said. And then, because Muriel had taught her to tell the truth, even when it cost her, she talked about you every day. She kept the chair on the screened porch turned so she could see the dock, just in case. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Grief and guilt, braided the way they always are. He opened his mouth. "Griffin." Irina's voice cut across the terrace, bright and territorial. She came around the trellis and stopped, reading the scene quickly, her face doing something fast and complicated. "What are you doing back here with the staff?" "Talking," Griffin said, "about my grandmother." "How touching." She slid her hand through his arm. "The Beaulieus are leaving. You have to say goodbye." Her eyes found Dana, cold as the lake in November. "And you, there's been a spill by the steps. Please see to it." "Of course, Miss Caldwell," Dana said. She went. She did not look back this time. But crossing the terrace in the lantern light, tray level in both hands, she felt Griffin's gaze follow her the whole way. And she thought, with the clear-sightedness of a woman who has already been told she will lose everything before the snow flies, that being noticed by the owner of the house was the single most dangerous thing that could happen to a woman in her position. She had no idea yet how right she was, or how completely wrong about which direction the danger would come from. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday in the flat white heat of noon. Dana was in the estate office, a small room lined with Muriel's books, off the main service corridor. Going through the September accounts when she heard the courier's van on the gravel. She signed for the envelope herself. It was addressed to the property manager in care of Greymere Estate. The return address was a law firm in Toronto. Desjardins, Marchetti and Oe, she recognized it. They had handled Muriel's affairs for 30 years. She assumed it was about the wedding contracts or the pending staff changes. Something cold and procedural about the transfer of management. She nearly set it on Griffin's desk unopened. But it was addressed, she saw, holding it up to the light from the window, not to Griffin Aldrich, not to the estate. It was addressed to Miss Dana Hollis. She was still frowning at it when the office door opened and Irina leaned in, coffee cup in hand, wearing the expression of a woman who has decided she already owns a room. "There you are." She stopped. Her eyes went to the envelope in Dana's hands, to the law firm's name embossed in the corner. Something in her face sharpened. "What's that?" "A letter," Dana said, "for me." "For you?" Irina's voice climbed in disbelief. "From Desjardins Marchetti. That's the family's firm. Give it here. There's obviously been an error." She crossed the room and held out her hand, palm up. "Staff don't receive correspondence from Griffin's lawyers. Hand it over before you embarrass yourself." Dana almost gave it to her. 4 years of instinct almost moved her hands. Then she thought of Muriel. "You look at the room." "It has my name on it," Dana said, and did not move. Irina flushed. "In this house you do as what is going on." Griffin stood in the doorway. No one had heard him come in. He looked from Irina's outstretched hand to the envelope Dana held, and his face was careful. "Open it," he said to Dana, not unkindly. "If it's a mistake, we'll sort it out." Dana looked at both of them. The woman who wanted her gone before the snow, and the man whose grandmother had kept a chair angled toward the dock for years. She slid her thumb under the heavy seal. The paper tore in a room that had gone entirely still. Inside were 3 documents and a covering letter. She unfolded the letter and read the first line, and the second, and the floor of the world tilted very slightly beneath her. "Well," Irina demanded, "what does it say?" Dana's voice, when it came, was not quite her own. "It's from Mr. Desjardins. He apologizes for the delay. The estate has been in probate, sealed, pending verification of the final conditions of the will." She unfolded the second document, heavy paper, a county seal, an embossed heading that read Certificate of Title. Her eyes moved down it, down to the line where the registered proprietor was named. "He says Muriel Aldrich transferred Greymere privately, held in trust, sealed until probate cleared." She looked up at both of them. "The name on the deed," she said, "is mine." For a long moment, no one in the small bright room said anything at all. Irina was the first to find her voice. It came out white and thin. "That's a forgery. Griffin, tell her that's a forgery. That's—" But Griffin Aldrich was not looking at the deed. He was looking at Dana. And he was not, she saw, surprised. That, more than anything Irina was saying, was what made the room feel suddenly airless. The lawyers came, as he had quietly promised they would. Desjardins himself arrived first, with an apology and a second envelope. Cream-colored, sealed, Dana's name on it in the slanting, impatient handwriting she knew from 4 years of household notes left on the kettle, the supply room door, the boathouse ledger. "Refresh the east flue before Thanksgiving, Dana. I am not the type to freeze." He set the envelope on the desk between them and explained what Muriel had arranged. The house to Dana outright, the family trust, the investment accounts, the Aldrich holdings, the operating fund that paid to keep a heritage property on a Muskoka lake alive through 8 months of off-season. Those remained with Griffin, entirely deliberate. 2 boats tied to the same cleat. She was, Desjardins said, almost to himself, a very precise woman. Sandra Aldrich arrived that afternoon. Griffin's aunt, Muriel's daughter, 67 years old, upright as a century-old pine, pearls and pale linen despite the heat, and a resemblance to the photographs in the main hall that told Dana exactly who she was before anyone said a word. She came with 3 lawyers and sat in the main sitting room and explained, without raising her voice, that she intended to pursue a claim of undue influence. A lonely, aging woman, an isolated property, a single member of staff who managed her accounts, her correspondence, her visitor access. "I didn't control any of those things," Dana said. "I managed the house. I read to her in the evenings." "You'll appreciate," Sandra continued as though Dana had not spoken, "how that arrangement presents to a court. A young woman, no family, no assets, no connections, who arrives at a service entrance and 4 years later leaves with the freehold." She set a single sheet on the table, a number. It was a very large number. "Sign the house back to the estate. Accept this settlement. Walk away today. No newspapers, no years of your name beside words like manipulation and elder fraud. You are clearly not a foolish person, Miss Hollis. The sitting room was quiet. The lake glittered through the windows. Dana thought of what the number would buy. A small place of her own, a door that locked from her side, freedom from ever again being assessed for her usefulness in someone else's hallway. She was still looking at it when Griffin appeared in the doorway. He looked at his aunt, at the lawyers arranged behind her, at Dana sitting straight-backed in the window light. And then he did the thing that Sandra had clearly not anticipated. The physician's letter is on file, he said, coming fully into the room. Desjardins has it. She was entirely of sound mind 18 months before she died, Sandra, and she did this with 30 years of her own lawyer's signature behind it. He stopped at the center of the room, and whatever this cost him, he had decided to pay it in front of witnesses, where it could not be quietly retracted afterward. I won't be part of a challenge that calls my grandmother's judgment into question to get around her name. She wasn't confused. She was the clearest person any of us ever knew. And she made a choice. Sandra stared at him. You're 8 weeks from a wedding. You have 400 guests who've already... I know, Griffin said, quietly, and something in the way he said it, 3 flat words carrying none of the rehearsed certainty she'd expected, made Dana turn and look at him. Because it was not the voice of a man defending a legal document. It was the voice of a man who had just heard his own future described out loud, and did not recognize it. Sandra left with her lawyers. The sitting room emptied of everyone but the afternoon light and the two of them. Griffin let out a slow breath. She was right about one thing, he said. You can't maintain this property on what I pay you. The heating alone in November. I know exactly what the heating costs, Dana said. I've paid the invoices for 4 years. That's more than anyone in your family can say. Something almost like a smile crossed his face. Then you understand what she did, he said. She built a trap with 2 doors and put us each on one side of it. Desjardins explained the arithmetic. And what did the arithmetic tell you? Dana held the cream envelope in her hand. Muriel's letter, still sealed, warm from being carried against her all afternoon. She felt its weight, and the weight of the deed folded beside it, and most of all the weight of a truth she was only beginning to see the full shape of. It told me, she said quietly, that she didn't leave me a house. She left me a reason you'd have to come home. The words landed in the sitting room like a stone into still water. For one unguarded instant, Griffin Aldrich looked at her the way he had looked in the front hall 4 days ago, startled, opened, entirely without the boardroom, and Dana understood too late that she had just said the truest thing in the room, and that neither of them had been ready to hear it. He recovered first, he always would. Read her letter, he said, stepping back. Tonight, alone. Whatever she wanted you to know will be in there. She never once in her life left anything to chance. He turned for the door, then stopped, one hand on the frame. Lock the deed somewhere only you can reach. Not a drawer in this house. He didn't look back. Not everyone under this roof wants that paper to survive the week. He was gone before she could answer, and it was only after his footsteps faded down the corridor that Dana noticed he had not, in the entire long and terrible afternoon, once referred to Irina as his fiancée. She read the letter that night alone by the lamp in the estate office, door locked, deed pressed flat under the account ledgers. The cream envelope trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Not fear, she told herself, only the strangeness of hearing a familiar voice come out of the silence after 10 months of quiet. My dear Dana, it began in that slanting, impatient hand. If you are reading this, then I am somewhere I can no longer scold you for being late, and the lawyers have finally done what I asked. Yes, I asked. Don't waste 1 minute imagining the old woman was muddled. I have never been muddled in my life. I have only ever been underestimated, which, as you well know, is a different and far more useful thing. I have left you, Greymere, not because you managed it. A great many competent people have managed this house, and I barely remember their names by supper. I have left it to you because you are the only person who ever loved this house without wanting to own it. Everyone else who will now descend upon you, and they will descend, trust me, like geese on a freshly seeded lawn, wants the house for what it is worth. You are the only one who wants it for what it is. I have done a hard thing to you, and I won't pretend otherwise. I have tied you to my grandson because he is tied to nothing, and a man tied to nothing eventually drifts. He doesn't know how to stay. His father taught him that caring is how you get hurt. The money finished the job, but not completely. I watched him at my funeral from wherever it is one watches these things. He stood at the back of the church and could not make himself come to the front, but he came. There is something left in him, Dana. I am betting this house on it. I am betting you on it. There is one more thing you must know, and I have not put it where the lawyers could find it, because it is not the law's business and it will hurt people I have loved. So, I am writing it only to you, and I trust you, as I have always trusted you, to know when the moment comes." The letter stopped. Dana turned the page over. It was blank. She turned back and found, at the very bottom, a single line pressed in beneath the signature in a hand grown suddenly fainter. Written, she understood, on a different and more tired day. "The copies are in the cedar box behind the navigation charts in the boathouse. He has never seen a single one. Tell him only when it's true." Dana sat very still. Outside, across the dark lawn, a loon called once across the lake. The great house creaked and settled around her. She would need to go to the boathouse in the morning. And then, faint through the ceiling above, she heard Irina's heels on the floor of the master bedroom, a sharp, deliberate sound. And a moment later, carrying clearly through the old walls, Irina's voice calling Griffin's name in a way that made perfectly clear she had just found out everything. Dana was down the service stairs before she had decided to move. She reached the gallery above the main hall and stopped. Below, Irina stood under the hall chandelier, phone gripped in one hand, still in her party clothes. Griffin faced her from the foot of the stairs. Between them lay a bar of moonlight from the tall east windows, and neither of them had stepped into it. "Tell me it's a lie," Irina said. Her voice had lost all its polish. "Sandra called me an hour ago. She said you stood in that sitting room and defended it. In front of the family's own lawyers you sided with." The last word came out cracked. "Tell me Sandra is wrong, Griffin." "Sandra isn't wrong." The two words dropped into the hall and came back off every hard surface. Irina laughed, a thin, bright sound with nothing behind it. "You'd throw away Greymere, throw away us, for a signature on a piece of paper for her." "I didn't throw anything away," Griffin said. His voice stayed level, but Dana had learned to read what lay underneath that evenness, the flatness a man uses when the thing beneath it is anything but flat. "My grandmother made a legal transfer 18 months before she died. I won't go to court to call her out of her mind, Irina. I won't do it." "That's what Sandra said you'd call it, sentiment." She spat the word. "She said you'd hide behind the old woman's memory because it's easier than admitting you've lost your nerve." "Maybe I have." He said it quietly, and it stopped her. "Maybe 10 months in that flat in the city taught me something about what a house means when there's no one in it you'd cross a room for." The chandelier's crystals moved in a current the old house produced in the night, throwing small shifting lights across the marble. Irina went still. Then something shrewd moved through the hurt on her face, and Dana, watching from above in the dark, felt the temperature of the whole exchange change. Irina crossed into the bar of moonlight, deliberate. She put her hand flat on Griffin's chest over the open collar. "All right," she said softly. "All right, darling, no lawyers tonight, just us." Her voice dropped to something warm and reasonable. "But you have to see how it looks. A young woman alone with a rich old woman for 4 years, running her accounts, managing her visitors, and now the freehold." Her thumb moved along his collar. "You're a clever man. You've built companies from nothing. You know what a careful person looks like when she's playing a long game." Dana's hand tightened on the cold gallery rail. "I'm the one who stayed with you through the difficult years," Irina went on, quieter now, all soft appeal. "Through the deals that went wrong, through the nights you couldn't be in a room with your own thoughts. Not her, me." Her thumb moved at his collar. "Don't let a stranger and a piece of paper decide who you are." Dana, in the dark above, understood exactly what she was watching. It was masterful. It was in its way almost true, and that was precisely what made it work. Irina had found the one wound in him, the one Muriel had named in her letter, and she was pouring herself into it. Griffin's hand came up and closed around Irina's wrist. For a long moment, Dana could not tell whether he was moving it away or holding it there. "I need to think," he said, "alone, Irina." Her hand fell. Something moved across her face, calculation quickly covered, and then she smiled, small and certain, a woman who had decided she was winning. "I'll be in the guest wing," she said. "I'm not going back to the city and leaving you to be talked into something irreversible by a property manager's ghost." She gathered her phone. "We can test quietly, and in 8 weeks I walk across that lawn as your wife. And all of this," a graceful gesture at the hall, the stairs, the shadowed gallery where she had no idea Dana stood, "is exactly what it was always going to be." She went up the far staircase, a door closed. The hall fell quiet. Griffin stayed where he was in the bar of moonlight and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose, and stood like that a long time. Dana watched him from above and did not breathe. She thought of going down. She thought of the letter warm in her jacket pocket and the cedar box in the boathouse, and the fact that she had hours ago said the truest thing in the room and been sorry for it. She went back upstairs the way she had come and did not sleep. By morning, the story was in the county. She knew it the moment Andre arrived at 7 with his roses and a folded newspaper he set on the kitchen table without a word. Page 6. A photograph of Greymere shot from the county road, and beside it a smaller one, grainy, some years out of date, of Dana herself at some Long Ago estate function, caught mid-step behind a serving tray. The headline had been built to carry across every breakfast table in Muskoka. Housekeeper named sole heir of historic lake property, family cries fool. She folded the paper so she couldn't see it. They rang the boathouse at 5, Andre said quietly, arranging stems he did not need to arrange. A woman, very sweet, she said, asking had I ever seen you manage Mrs. Aldrich's affairs. Manage was her word. His hands went still among the yellow chrysanthemums. I told her that Mrs. Aldrich managed everyone in this house until her last week of life, including her own doctors, and then I put the telephone down. You shouldn't have answered at all, Andre. I have worked in great houses for 30 years. He looked up, and his face was not his usual face, only tired and kind. I know how this goes. First the newspaper. Then the neighbors remember things that didn't happen. Then the people who smiled at you at the party find they were never really your friends. He placed a single perfect chrysanthemum on the table beside her hand. Muriel's favorite. For your pocket, so you remember whose taste this house was built on when they tell you it was never yours to touch. Dana looked at the flower, and her throat closed, and she could not answer. That was when the estate car came up the drive. Not Irina's town car. A silver sedan she didn't recognize. A young man got out in a pressed suit, carrying a leather folio, with the apologetic efficiency of someone sent to do a thing his employer would rather not be seen doing personally. Miss Hollis. He had a card ready before she reached the step. I'm from Hartley & Associates. We act for several of the Aldrich family interests. I wonder if I might have 10 minutes. She took him into the morning room and did not offer tea and stood while he sat and listened. My clients have reconsidered their position overnight, he said, opening the folio. Litigation is expensive, public, and unkind to everyone's reputation, including yours, so they've authorized me to make an offer. He slid a single sheet across the table. The number was larger than yesterday's. Sign the house back to the estate, he went on. Accept this and you walk away today. No court, no newspapers picking apart your history. No years of your name beside words like isolation and undue influence. He let that rest. Between us, Miss Hollis, a jury will look at a young woman with no family to speak of and a very great house. You know how that reads. Take the certain thing. She was still looking at the number when the morning room door opened and Irina walked in, immaculate, coffee in hand, as though she already lived there. Good. You've met Mr. Hartley's associate. She smiled at Dana over the rim of her cup. I suggested he come early. I told Griffin I'd handle the practicalities so he wouldn't have to. He finds this sort of thing distasteful. He gets it from his grandmother. All that pretending money is beneath one while living entirely on it. She set her cup down on the mantel. It's a very generous number, Dana. Sign it, and we can all stop pretending you belong in these rooms. And there it was. The thing laid on the table beside the cold morning coffee. The clean, comfortable, dignified exit. The number that made everyone's problem disappear, including her own. Dana's hand actually moved toward the pen. Then she thought of the letter in her jacket pocket. You are the only one who wants it for what it is. She thought of the cedar box in the boathouse. He has never seen a single one. Muriel had known this morning would come, had known they would arrive with a number and a soft voice, and a page 6 headline, and she had left a second message precisely because she had known. I trust you to know when the moment comes. Dana drew her hand back from the pen. No, she said. The young man's professional calm flickered. Mrs. Hollis, I'd strongly urge. I heard you the first time. She picked up the single sheet, folded it once and set it back in front of him. You want me to sign away a house because a jury might not like my face? Because I have no relatives to stand in a courtroom and swear I'm honest. She held his gaze. Muriel Aldrich stood up for me in writing, with a physician beside her and 30 years of her lawyer's name behind it. She's the only reference I've ever needed, and she is louder than any jury you can frighten me with. She looked at him steadily. Take your number back, and tell whoever sent you that the house isn't for sale, and neither am I. The young man closed his folio. He was, to his credit, almost admiring. He left without finishing his sentence. Irina did not leave. She stood very still by the cold hearth, and when the front door closed, she set her coffee cup on the mantel with a small, precise click, and the warmth she had worn at midnight was entirely gone. "You stupid girl," she said quite pleasantly. "You had one clean way out, and you've refused it in front of a witness." She crossed the room without hurrying and stopped close enough that Dana could smell her perfume. Something cold and expensive, cedar and white flowers. Now it gets ugly. Now Sandra's firms go through every hour you spent alone with that woman. Every account you paid, every letter you posted for her, every prescription you collected. Read out in court as evidence that a clever nobody isolated a wealthy old woman and bled the house right out from under her own family. Her voice never rose. That was the frightening thing. You think you loved her? It won't matter. By the time Sandra's finished, no one in this county will remember you as anything but the caretaker who took a mansion. She moved to the door and paused and delivered the last of it lightly over her shoulder. By the way, I had the estate office lock changed this morning. Griffin's request for document security. So whatever papers you've been keeping in there, her eyes glittered, you'll want to check they're still yours. Her heels struck the stone floor, light and certain, and she was gone. Dana stood alone in the morning room with the chrysanthemum in her pocket, and for 3 full seconds she could not breathe. The estate office lock changed this morning. The deed was upstairs, hidden under the account ledgers in the bedroom. She'd moved it. Griffin had told her to move it. But the cedar box. Muriel's letter had said the boathouse. But what if there was more in that office? What if Muriel had left something else in there? Something she hadn't yet found. She did not run. Running told a house that something was worth catching. She walked, the steady, unhurried walk of a woman who had spent 4 years being invisible, down the service corridor to the small book-lined room that had been Muriel's favorite retreat. The new lock was bright brass, the wood around it faintly scratched from the rush. She tried the handle, it held. But she had run this property for 4 years. She knew things about Greymere that no locksmith sent up from Huntsville that morning could know, including the narrow connecting door, papered over in the old days to match the paneling, that opened from the back of the linen room into the estate office. She found Andre in the greenhouse sorting bulbs. "Andre," she said quietly, "the old jib door between the linen room and the office. Does it still open?" He looked at her for a long moment over the clay pots. Then, without a word, he moved 2 buckets aside from the corner and pressed his broad thumb against a seam in the papered wall that no one who hadn't worked this property for over a decade would ever have found. Something clicked. A narrow panel swung inward on a breath of cool, book-smelling air. "Mrs. Aldrich showed me," he murmured. "The winter the pipes froze," she said. He glanced at Dana. "A great house should never have a room a person can be locked out of entirely." His eyes held hers. She said one day it might matter. Dana stepped through into the estate office, into the dim, familiar smell of old paper and the ghost of Earl Grey, and went straight to the back shelf by the window, the low one where, for 4 years running, Muriel had kept folded notebooks and reference binders she never threw away. There, tucked behind the binders, was the cedar box, just as the letter had described. She lifted it. Inside, a packet of envelopes bound with kitchen string. The address on the top one was not Greymere. It was a Toronto address, Griffin's apartment. Return to sender. Everyone unopened, across 14 years. Dana's breath caught. She pressed her palm flat over the box. That was the moment the brass lock on the main door turned, and Griffin Aldrich stepped into his grandmother's office and found Dana standing at the shelf with a cedar box held against her chest, and the panel in the wall still swinging softly shut behind her. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. "The office was locked," he said slowly. His eyes moved from her face to the panel now seamlessly closed. "I left the only key with Irina this morning." "You left the key to your grandmother's office," Dana said, "to the one person in this house who would most like to decide what's in it." Her voice did not rise. It never did. "You told me 4 days ago to keep the documents somewhere safe. You told me not everyone under this roof wanted that paper to survive the week. And then you handed the key to this room, to Irina Caldwell, before breakfast." She held his gaze. "So which was it, Mr. Aldrich? Were you protecting the documents, or were you helping her find them?" The question hung in the room. She watched it strike him, watched the evenness in his face fight to hold and fail, watched something raw and stricken open underneath it, and understood, with the cold clarity that had come to her at the first line of the deed, that she had just asked the one question that would decide everything. He was quiet a long time. "The latter," he said finally, not deliberately, but the effect is the same, and I know it. He stepped further into the room. What's in the box? Dana set it on the desk between them. She told him what she'd found. She told him about the letters, 14 years of them, never forwarded, everyone returned. She told him what Muriel had written in the letter. He has never seen a single one. She watched his face as she spoke. She watched it when she said your father never sent them. She watched the exact moment the shape of it became fully clear, that the distance he'd believed his grandmother felt for him, the judgment he thought this house held against him, had been a story someone else had built. Not the truth, not even close to the truth. Griffin sat down on the low window seat. Slowly, like a man setting down a weight he'd carried so long he'd stopped noticing it wasn't part of him. She wrote to me, he said. It was barely a sentence. I thought the silence was mine. I thought I'd made myself absent and she'd accepted it. He was quiet. She didn't know I never got them. No, Dana said. She thought you were choosing not to answer. It's in the letters if you want to read them. He looked at the cedar box, then at her. She gave the house to a stranger, he said, instead of me. She gave it somewhere your family couldn't use it against you, Dana said. She took Greymere out of the fight altogether. She put it somewhere it would run on something other than last names. She held his gaze steadily. She didn't leave it away from you, Griffin. She threw herself between you and every person who'd ever want to reduce you to a family tree. That is not a woman who thought you'd failed her. Something moved across his face and broke, the way ice breaks on a northern lake in spring, not with a crack but with a release, the long stillness giving way to motion underneath. He pressed the back of his wrist to his mouth and did not speak for a while. Dana did not tell him it was fine. Muriel had taught her that saying it's fine when it wasn't was its own kind of lie. When he had steadied, he said quietly, she tied me to a person she trusted. She tied the house to a person she thought you'd be worth staying for, Dana said. Whether she was right about that part wasn't mine to know. He looked at her for a long moment and then, she was right. Neither of them heard Irina on the stairs. She had followed the sound of Griffin's voice, or she had noticed the estate car on the drive and come looking. She came through the main door, the one she still had the key for, and stood in the doorway and took in the two of them, and the cedar box open on the desk, and she made a rapid, precise calculation. Darling, she said, crossing to Griffin, soft and immediate. I couldn't find you and I was worried. She sat beside him on the window seat and put her hand over his. Whatever this is, whatever she's told you, you don't have to decide anything today. We can sort this out. You and I, the way we've always sorted things out. Her thumb moved over his knuckles. Let me help you. Griffin looked down at her hand. You had the lock on this office changed before I was awake, he said. For the documents? Before I was awake, Irina. Before I'd said a word about it. He was quiet. You told me last night you stayed with me through the difficult years, that you understood what I needed. He lifted her hand from his and set it aside. What you understood was which lever to use. You've been waiting for this house since the moment my grandmother went. And the moment the deed didn't land where you expected. He looked at the cedar box. You were in this room before breakfast. Irina went very still. The wedding is in 8 weeks, she said. I know. You have 400. I know. His voice dropped to something quieter and more final than anything he'd said yet. You've been very good at a great many things, Irina, but staying was never one of them. I think I've known that for a while. I just didn't want to look at it. What Irina said next, to Dana, to the room, to the general air of a house that had never actually been hers, Dana let pass through her without catching. She had learned a long time ago which words in a grand room were worth carrying out of it. The front door opened and closed. The float plane lifted off the lake before noon and banked south and did not come back. Greymere let out its breath. Dana had felt it do that before. In the quiet that followed, Griffin stood in the middle of his grandmother's office and looked at the woman who had just held his name in a cedar box until the right moment, and something moved across his face that had no boardroom anywhere in it. The heating, he said. 40,000 a year, you said. Give or take. You know the heating costs of a house you'd owned for 3 days. I know the heating costs of a house I've loved for 4 years. Dana set the cedar box on the desk between them carefully, beside the navigation charts and the packet of envelopes. That was always the difference between your family and me, Mr. Aldrich. They knew what Greymere was worth. I knew what it cost. She almost smiled. Your grandmother thought that was the only qualification that ever mattered. She was right about most things. He came toward her across the worn carpet, slowly, The way a man moves when he has finally set down something very heavy, and stopped close enough that she could see the tiredness in his face had changed into something different. Not resolved exactly, just present. Actually, honestly present in a way it hadn't been before. She said in the letter, he said, that she wanted me to come home for the house and the person in it. His voice was low. She was matchmaking from beyond the grave. She was incorrigible, Dana said, and her steadiness deserted her just slightly on the last syllable. Dana. He said her name like it was the whole sentence. I've known you 4 days. Irina was right about that, if nothing else. 4 days is nothing. It's not enough to build anything real on. He looked at her. But I sat in this room this morning and found out I'm not who I thought I was. And the only thing in the world that felt true was you telling me I was worth the whole estate. I don't want the house. I've never wanted the house. I've spent 10 months proving I can live without it. His hand came up and stopped, not quite touching her face, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it. What I cannot seem to do, what I only found out this morning I cannot do, is want to leave the room you're in. Dana did not step back. She thought of an old woman keeping a chair angled toward the dock for years, betting a house on a boy she was certain had something left in him. She found that her hand had risen to meet his, and that she had, without quite deciding to, closed the last of the distance, so that his palm lay warm against her cheek. Then don't, she said. He didn't. He bent his head and she lifted hers, and the kiss when it came was nothing like the business pages, and everything like the boy Muriel had described. Careful and then not careful at all. A man learning in real time that staying did not have to be the thing that gets you hurt. When they stepped apart, the August light had moved another long measure across the floorboards, and neither of them had drifted anywhere. For the record, Dana said, her voice slightly unsteady, your grandmother is insufferably pleased with herself right now. For the record, Griffin said, and there it was, the dry, quiet thing she'd first glimpsed 4 days ago in the front hall, I intend to contest the deed. She went very still. On one condition. His thumb moved along her cheekbone. That the challenge is settled the same afternoon before a registrar and results in exactly one name being added to the title beside yours, not instead of, beside. That's not contesting a deed, Mr. Aldrich, Dana said unsteadily. That's a proposal wearing a lawyer's coat. I build companies out of nothing. I've learned to make the paperwork say what I mean. He rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Dana. Not in 8 weeks on a terrace in front of 400 people who came to see the property, whenever you like. In front of Andre and Desjardins and no one else. Let the county print what it wants. We'll have the documents. And I don't frighten, Dana said. No, I learned that watching you this morning. She looked at him, at the man whose grandmother had bet an entire estate on the chance that he had something left worth staying for. And she found to her own considerable surprise that Muriel had been right. She usually was. Yes, Dana said. They were married in October on the screened porch, with the lake going silver in the late afternoon light and Andre's chrysanthemums in every corner. There were 21 guests, the staff mister, Desjardins with his leather folder finally empty, 5 friends of Muriel's who arrived together in 2 cars older than any of them, and a small group from the village who had never once believed page 6. Andre walked Dana across the porch and wept without apology into a handkerchief the size of a small tablecloth. Sandra Aldrich came. She had arrived 3 weeks before to withdraw the legal challenge. Alone, without lawyers, in her pale linen and her pearls, and sat in the morning room where Dana had refused the settlement and accepted tea and looked at the lake for a long time. She left me the London Wharf property, Sandra had said finally. I assume you knew. Desjardins mentioned it. She never told me. Sandra looked at her hands. I stopped coming because the lake made me too sad after my brother went, and I thought she blamed me for the distance. She set her cup down, and something under the upright composure shifted. Just slightly, just for a moment, the way a window shifts when a house finally breathes. She understood why I stayed away. She said you and she were more alike than either of you admitted. Dana told her carefully, that you both loved things without quite knowing how to say it. Sandra looked at her for a long time. The chrysanthemums, she said at last quietly. She always put them in every corner, every September. Andre has them in every corner, Dana said. I promised. At the wedding, when it was done, Sandra was the first to cross the porch. She took Dana by both hands and said, low and even, so only Dana could hear it. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Aldrich. She'd say you were late. A pause. But she would be glad you came. They kept the house the way Muriel had always wanted it. Full in every season, no wing shuttered unnecessarily, no corner without flowers in autumn. Griffin learned to come home. It was not instant, and it was not easy. A man does not unlearn a lifetime of leaving in a single season. But he learned it the way he learned the things that mattered to him. Thoroughly, and then completely, until the long drive up from the city ceased to feel like the start of something difficult and became simply the way home looked. On winter evenings, with the lake frozen and the wood stove running and the heating bill already considerable, which Griffin paid without complaint, which Dana took as reliable evidence of a changed man, they read in the estate office by the lamp, in the 2 chairs by the window, with Muriel's letters stacked on the shelf between them. Neither of them ever bet on anything. It was not something either of them knew how to do. Once a year, on the October morning she had gone, they angled the old chair on the screened porch toward the dock and left it there for the day and said nothing. Because some things do not need to be said between 2 people who have both loved the same difficult and magnificent old woman. And on the office windowsill, where Muriel had always left her tea to go cold, there stood now a single framed photograph, taken from the cedar box, finally developed from an old roll of film she had kept for years. It showed a woman in her 60s laughing on the dock in late August light, a small boy of perhaps 3 balanced on her hip, both of them squinting happily into the long summer sun. On the back, in that slanting, impatient hand, 4 words: the summer he first arrived. Dana kept it where the morning light found it first. It was, she thought, the truest thing in all 28 rooms. Not proof of bloodlines or legal titles or family names stretching back a century. Proof of something older and harder to name. The thing that Muriel had staked this whole house on, and that had turned out against every reasonable expectation to have been exactly right all along. If this story stayed with you, if you believe that the ones who show up, who stay, who carry the tray and take the time to look at the room, are the strongest people in any house, then stay with us here at Platinum Files. Subscribe and let the next story find you. There's always a chair by the window here, and it's turned your way.